In a previous video, I talked about Mitodicure, the pill that is being developed by Professor Klaus Wirth with the aim of being the world's first ME-CFS and Long Covid approved medication. Now in that video I talked about its mechanism of action and the research on which it is based. But today I'm going to go one step further. I'm going to tell you why I think that Mitodicure is the long-awaited answer for ME-CFS and Long Covid. But first, my name is Patrick Usher and I am author of the book Understanding ME-CFS and Strategies for Healing, in which I break down some of the latest exciting research into ME-CFS, including in particular the work of Professor Klaus Wirth and Professor Carmen Scheibenbogen, and in which I talk about various strategies that I have used in order to improve my quality of life as an ME-CFS patient. Links for that book are down below. Now, just to give a quick recap on the science on which this pill is based. What the work of Wirth and Scheibenbogen have found is that there is a disturbance in the ion concentrations within the muscle cells of ME-CFS patients. This means that there's an imbalance between sodium, potassium and calcium. The body normally wants to keep these within certain concentrations in order for the cells to be happy and to function well. However, in ME-CFS, Wirth and Scheibenbogen first found that there is a build-up of sodium concentrations within the muscle cells. This is from a paper they did a few years ago, in which they got patients to do an exercise challenge, strengthening their calf muscles, and then they used an MRI afterwards in order to see the sodium concentrations were within the muscles. And indeed, they found that they were almost twice as high in comparison to the healthy but sedentary controls. Now, sodium overload in the muscles is itself responsible for many symptoms, in particular the muscles becoming weak, easily fatigued, and having the classic sign of ME-CFS, reduced hand grip strength. But when you have sodium overload within the muscle cells, you're only one step away from experiencing another problem, and that is calcium overload. This is because when the sodium concentrations go up within the muscle cells, there reaches a certain point where the cell starts to become much more dysfunctional, and it actually begins to import rather than export calcium. Then you get the calcium overload, which actually causes cell toxicity and damage. And that, put very simply, is no joke. For Wirth and Scheibenbogen, this calcium overload in the muscles is in fact the main mechanism of PEM. Not only does it cause the cells to become very, very dysfunctional, it also leads to damaging and reducing the mitochondria and ATP levels. As Wirth and Scheibenbogen write in a previous paper, we assume calcium overload is the main mechanism of PEM, exercise intolerance, and of more severe relapses. In ME-CFS patients, intracellular sodium is presumably either close to the threshold for reverse mode NCX activation. That's the what I just explained to you, where the calcium gets imported rather than exported from the cell. That's the calcium exchanger. Already at rest, or alternatively rises rapidly during exercise to reach the level at which the NCX changes into reverse mode to cause calcium overload. Thus, even at moderate levels of exercise of everyday life, this threshold may be easily crossed, causing calcium overload and PEM. The sodium concentration threshold for reverse mode NCX activation may explain the existence of an effort threshold for the induction of PEM. Okay, so that's the research, the basis on which this pill is based. Now what Mitodicure will be doing is it will be improving greatly the sodium concentrations within the muscle cells, and it will be doing that by influencing something called the sodium-potassium pump. Please see my previous video for more about that. But basically it will bring down the sodium concentrations in the muscles, and because it will do that, it will also bring down that threshold for crossing over into calcium overload. Therefore, when you're taking this pill, it'll be really hard to reach that threshold of calcium overload and tip over into post-exertional malaise. And everything associated with it, including the mitochondrial damage, reduction in quantity, reduction in ATP levels, and so on. So that is the rationale for Mitodicure. When you're taking this pill, it will make it very hard to crash. And we're going to talk about the implications of that a little later in the video. But now we come to the crux of this video, which is my conviction that Mitodicure, given further research that has come out in recent times, arguably is the long-awaited answer for ME-CFS and Long Covid. And I say this because the research I've described from Wirth and Scheibenbogen, it's a model, and it involves many things that are framed as an hypothesis. For example, the calcium overload was previously framed by them as an hypothesis. Now, of course, it follows the laws of physiology, because when you get sodium overload, you get calcium overload. But it was still an hypothesis. Now, as I mentioned, they proved the sodium overload already, so that part of the puzzle has been established. To have the basis for Mitodicure, you also need to prove the calcium overload. Now, there is no way of actually in vivo, i.e. in a living human being, proving calcium overload in the muscles. However, you can infer that it is happening from the basis of known physiological laws. Given research that has happened over the last year, we are now in a position to say that surely calcium overload is occurring within ME-CFS and within PEM in particular, just as Wirth and Scheibenbogen said. We can say this because a paper last year by Wust and Appelman did muscle biopsies patients before and during post-exertional malaise. You're seeing this image on the screen right now. This is a normal muscle biopsy. In contrast, this is what the muscles looked like during post-exertional malaise. So what you see here on the left, this kind of gooey stuff, is actually muscle tissue necrosis. This means that the muscles during post-exertional malaise, some of them actually die. They become so damaged that they actually die. Now they will regenerate, but this is a major evidence for why PEM feels so awful and for the nature of the damage that is caused during it. But in order for us to be able to make sense of ME-CFS as an illness at all, nothing can be random in the disease. We have to be able to explain why this muscle necrosis actually occurs. We can't just say, oh well, that's fine, that's interesting. We have to be able to have a model that explains it. According to current scientific knowledge, the only possible reason for this muscle tissue death is the calcium overload. Remember, calcium overload is toxic to the cells. It kills the cells. Wirth and Scheibenbogen argue to this effect in their most recent end of 2024 paper on the accumulated evidence of the pathophysiology of skeletal muscle disturbances. Based on our current knowledge on the known causes of muscle damage related to exercise and malperfusion, diminished function of ion transporters and consecutive calcium overload induced toxicity is the only explanation for tissue necroses and particularly the mitochondrial damage in ME-CFS. We have essentially as much scientific proof as is possible to back up both the Wirth and Scheibenbogen model. This means that almost certainly their view of ME-CFS is correct and it has demystified the illness. And secondly, we have enough scientific evidence to say, let us actually test the Mitodicure pill. And I say this with such conviction because when I talk about Mitodicure to people, they often say, oh, surely we need more evidence. This is a big claim that a pill could stop PEM. They're not sure about that. But we have enough evidence. And now we just need to let the pill do the talking. The implications of a pill which could make post-exertional malaise very hard to experience or even impossible are just enormous. Because post-exertional malaise is what keeps people stuck in the illness. It is what reignites all the cycles. And then the body has to do this massive repair job to actually get out of that. But the key thing is that in most cases, not all, but in most cases, the body does actually manage to heal enough to get out of an episode of PEM. And what that tells us is that the body, when you have ME-CFS, is still usually set on healing. Now, what would happen if you took a pill that actually took post-exertional malaise out of the picture and instead your body was able to put its healing resources into everything else? Could it actually be a pill that might facilitate healing? Now, to be clear, not in and of itself a cure, because ME-CFS is so complex. But the key, clearly, with the nature of ME-CFS as it is, in order to help people to heal, is to have a pill that reduces the burdens in a targeted way so much that the body can then do the rest of the work itself. And surely Mitodicure, of all the options that are out there right now, and who else is proposing pills for ME-CFS? Let's face it. But even if there were plenty of pills being proposed, given what we know about the pathophysiology of the illness, it is surely the pill to actually prioritise, obtain the funding for, and get the necessary trials done. So those are my thoughts on Mitodicure and why I believe it is the potential answer that we have been waiting for. I'm hoping to do more videos on this topic. I also hope at some point to interview Professor Klaus Wirth to talk more about his ideas. But that's it for now. Please leave your thoughts on Mitodicure down below, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.